Hi there, Roy Rogers, Oldenkamp, WeHoNews here. I'm here with Brian Pera, director of The Way I See Things, being featured at Outfest this year. And we're going to ask Brian a few questions here in the courtyard of Villa Allegra. So Brian, you are a writer and a screenwriter, and you have a new film out, your first feature, The Way I See Things. How did you manage to do the segue from novel writing, I believe you're a novelist, right,
Yeah.
to actual screenwriting, and did you find it to be totally different and a compromise?
It wasn't a compromise. I think I pretty much accepted from the beginning of the process that if I wanted to make the movie and wanted to maintain control, I would have to do it very cheaply, and I would have to be very, very flexible. So I think a lot of writers, at least that I know, are everything they write is very precious and shouldn't be touched. And I've always been very flexible because I think there's more than one way to say something. And I really wasn't finished when I wrote the book that this was based on. I really wanted to sort of keep walking around in that story for a while. So there were other things about it, that I wanted to explore. And in fact, I'm preparing to do another movie with a really good friend of mine who wrote a book. And I was trying to warn him about that, that it will be his book, but it won't be his book. It'll be, I feel like a screenplay cuts a beeline through a novel. So, yeah, they're very different exercises. And it was hard for me to figure out how to condense the information and sort of relay things without having a narrator or things like that. A novel's really expansive for me. You can just sort of go on at length.
Sure.
And a screenplay was just had to be really concise, and the information was sort of mathematical in a sense. It had to add up to certain things and to make certain arrangements. And it's hard to think visually if you've never made a film. I had never made one, so
you didn't really work shot by shot. You kind of had, because I think you call your group pretty much a collective.
Yeah.
Right. So there was, and it looked like there was a lot of interpretive action going on. As far
you mean
as,
like improvisation?
Yeah, a bit of improv, or perhaps even like the shots seemed pretty focused and actually very beautiful. But and when you see the movie, there's a lot of stuff going on during the movie that I think to a degree is clarified later on.
Right.
A few reels into the film, you start to feel, okay, this is all related. And then it wraps at the end with, I think still an interpretive level, but it does give you direction. And I think that's kind of interesting in the film. And I know you'd mentioned also that you were a little tired of the formulaic filmmaking concept, and part of your collective group is to perhaps break out of that mold.
Well, yeah. I mean, the group is not necessarily everybody directs the movie.
Right.
It's more like it's more about artists nurturing each other and sort of watching each other's backs and supporting each other. So it's not really about. I mean, I was definitely the director,
Right,
and
right.
not a shot was sort of done that without my consent, or.
Gotcha.
But it was definitely, and in fact, I every shot in it is edited exactly, modulated exactly. So I was very hands-on.
Right.
But I absolutely believed in sort of recognizing everyone's contribution and figuring out how to tweak that. So there is improvisation, but it's within the context of the script and within the very definite perimeters, which to me is a more constructive way of improvising. Elsewise, you could just end up with a buttload of footage that you have no real place or way to fit in.
And we'll fix it in editing.
Or try to.
Yeah.
And we had enough problems, so
Yeah.
I didn't want to compound them.
Did you edit on Avid or
Final Cut Pro. Yeah. And so there was a lot of collaboration and a lot of when you get on the film set, you realize, okay, this isn't working, so I'm going to try this. And knowing who you're working with and knowing sort of having a sense of what they excel at and what their weaknesses are helps in that situation, because what they are able to do gives you ideas, and you can use that, and hopefully in a sensitive enough way that you honor what they do rather than sort of exploit it.
Sweet. So, Brian, let me ask you this. In the film, you seem to have a sense of healing as a concept behind it, of damaged people. And you mentioned that there was a personal reference to you in this, that you had extreme loss, people dying around you in a short period of time. Do you feel that these works you've created are responses to that, and that this exploration, has it in fact helped you to heal? Do you think it's an ongoing open question, and is there more involved for you, or is this always going to be the way things are?
Well, I think for me, if I've matured at all, it's sort of gaining an awareness that there is no magic bullet. You know, something doesn't happen and it changes everything. It just sort of shifts everything, but everything's still there. You know, and I don't think I made the movie to sort of move beyond it. Although I certainly made it as a way to deal with it, just like I wrote the novel as a way to deal with it. But I just wanted to walk around in it a little more, and by doing the movie, it was a way of keeping them alive for a little bit longer, or sort of working out how I feel about them and what they meant to me and what that process, you know, is like. But and you know, it's just sort of a tribute to them, although they're never mentioned, or they're never implicitly participating in the movie as characters, explicitly. I mean, you know, it's a way to sort of pay homage to them and their memory, and just, you know, I think it is. I think when you probably, because I'm a little older now than I was when I wrote my first novel, which also dealt with loss. I think that it absolutely shapes who you are, and that's why I'm interested in memory, because, you know, you just keep recycling everything in your head, and you tell yourself stories about what's happened to you to try to deal with them and figure out how you feel about them. But, you know, I feel a lot differently 8 years later from writing that novel, and I don't expect huge changes from the things I do. I'm a big believer in just sort of not letting anybody stop me from going out and doing them, and not asking permission, and not waiting for the right circumstances. And, you know, if there's planes, then I'll move to the next neighborhood. I'll do whatever I have to do to get it done. And that's kind of that's sort of the opposite of hoping that this thing you're doing will change everything. You know, I lost that. You know, I don't have that now, because they're not coming back, those people. So, you know, how much is going to change?
Fascinating thing about the film, which I really enjoyed as I was watching, it reminded me of Robert Altman's Images, Ryuichi Sakamoto kind of. The sound in the film is, because the film is such a well-modulated film, I think there's sound cues that are really beautifully set in place, and yet never really obtrusive, and that move things along. And some of the song cue cuts were abrupt and cut to frame in a very interesting way too. It almost felt that the music became its own entity in the film, and I found that use really interesting throughout the entire film, actually.
Well, the guy who did the music, Harlan T. Bobo, is well known in Memphis and beyond, but I know him from Memphis, and I just love his work. And a friend of mine, a mutual friend of ours, said he had all this, you know, stuff he'd done for Showtime thing, that, you know, he'd done tons of stuff because he's really brilliant and prolific, and he had a lot left over, and he saw the movie and let me use it. And
Great.
when I listened to the songs, I loved them, because I love everything he does, basically. But I thought, well, I don't know if they're right, you know. But when we started laying them down, it was like everywhere we laid down those songs, they worked perfectly. It was like they were made for the movie. So that was really fortunate for me. In terms of, like, mentioning Altman and Images, I don't know if it says it in that, but I love Robert Altman, and, you know, I liked his philosophy about filming. I learned a lot from reading about him. I learned, you know, watching his movies has been a really big education for me.